Hello everyone, welcome to our new video. This is going to be a very special one because in this one we are going to talk about the machine learning and the training side of it. So basically we'll be trying to cover the best practice of on how to train these machine learning models to get the best results out of it. So it's going to be a very interesting topic. And to do that, we have a couple of questions that we would like to into. So these are some of the questions that we plan to cover during our session. So these are some common questions that we hear usually when it comes to AI center and the machine learning models and the training. So let's try to take one by one and see how we can address each and every question. Let's start with the first one. How the AI robot license work. So by default in UiPath, you have two AI robot licenses that you get with the trial. So how is this license utilized? How it is being used? So let's see about it. Okay, so when it comes to AI robot licenses, as I mentioned earlier, there are two licenses that you get for AI robots. So how it is being used as you create different AI models and you create training pipelines is bit different than how it's being allocated to different things in usual attended and unattended scenarios. The licenses basically. So what happens is um, for each and every machine learning model that you create, uh, it requires certain licenses. So as soon as you create the skill and once it's available, that utilize one license. So basically, for one ML or AI license, you can have two ML skills available. So basically, one skill will utilize 50% of one license. And when it comes to the training pipelines or the evaluation pipelines that you create in AI Center, that require one full license. So, if you think about the usage of these two licenses that we have, we can create up to two ML models and use the next available license for the training purposes. So, you get the overall idea. One license can handle two ML skills, and one license is required to create one uh, training or evaluation pipeline. Okay, so next question is around the version selection during the pipeline creation. So when you're creating these pipelines, it requires you to input two versions, the major version and the minor version of a machine learning model. So how can we select this? Okay, so the major version is actually the version of the package itself. So different packages have different versions. Um, so we always need to select the latest version from the major version. But when it comes to the minor version, it's a bit different. Minor version actually can have multiple different versions for the same major version. So, for example, let's say the major version is 11 and the minor version is 0. Every time you run the training pipeline, it will increase the minor version by 1. So, for a given major version, you have multiple minor versions. But how to select the minor version? What's the best way to do that? It's actually by using the lowest possible version. In other words, by default, it's a 0. So why we say that is this is mainly around document understanding projects as well. So that applies to all the models. So UiPath has already trained these models up to a certain extent. So what happens with each and every training pipeline is it kind of fine tunes the data that's in the machine learning model and tries to improve its accuracy. So we always need to select the lowest possible version, which is the 0, so that the training that we run that is added on top of what UiPath has already trained. And next time when the training pipeline completes, it will just increase the minor version saying 11.1 or something. But next time when you're doing the retraining again on that updated version, again select the lowest possible version, but at the end of the session, it will automatically update to the next version like 11.2. So the reason to do that is actually to use a larger data set for each and every training. So as long as you are selecting the lowest version, every time you run the training pipeline, it will have a lot of new data and it will keep on training on the new things. So for example, uh, let's take one document understanding scenario. So you are doing the initial training with 500 documents, and that gives you the initial model. And then over time you get about 300 to 400 new documents. So next time when you run the pipeline, once you select the lowest possible version, it will use the initial data that UiPath has given and the initial training data set that you gave. In addition to that, it will also use the newest data. So every time you see that when you run the pipeline, you will get a much larger data set to train on. This will not happen when you select the latest minor version because it's using a small data set. It's always using the newest data that you have submitted. So that can, in a way, reduce the accuracy. So it's always recommended to use the lowest possible version for the minor version so that every time you will get a much larger data set to train on. The next question is around evaluating your ML. So as you know, when you're creating pipelines, there are two options. One is the training pipeline, the other one is the evaluation. Or you can run both at. So what is the evaluation pipeline and why it is important? Yeah, so this is actually a very good question that I always come across from different guys from the community. So, the importance of the evaluation pipeline and why we need to run it. It's actually a very important thing because it's not only for document understanding or any specific tool, it applies to all the machine learning models that we have. So the important thing is once we train a model, we need to check its accuracy. We need to see how good it is performing its prediction or extraction or whatever it is doing. So through this evaluation pipeline, what you can do is you can give a separate data set other than the data set that you give for training and see how the model works on the new data set under evaluation using the knowledge it gathered through the training data and to see how accurate it is. So that's a very important thing that we need to look at because after all what we expect from these machine learning models is to be accurate and to predict the things in a better way. So the other thing to notice is that for the data set that you give for evaluation, it can be the same training data or it can be a new data set as well or a combination of both. Either way, it will generate the evaluation that it comes up with, and it will give you a result on AI Center. So, using this information, we can decide or we can see what kind of logics that we need to incorporate in our workflow to handle certain scenarios when it comes to this accuracy or extracting certain information, and deciding the confidence threshold in our workflows. So, for example, if you want to see the extracted data is having a higher confidence level, like more than 70% or something, so those things can be checked through this evaluation, because through that we can see what's the confidence threshold that we can come up with to include in our workflows. So this is a very interesting question. What's the best frequency to schedule your training pipeline? So let's see how we can answer that. Okay, so when it comes to scheduling these pipelines, it's not a good idea to schedule them every day, because, as I explained earlier, these pipelines are going to have huge amounts of data that is being used for training and evaluation. So sometimes these pipelines may run for a couple of days or even for so many hours based on the sample data set that you're giving. So instead of thinking about it on a daily basis, ideally it should be okay to schedule it on a monthly basis or even weekly basis or something, maybe during the weekend, based on your requirement. So ideally, those are the two options that we have in terms of scheduling this training and evaluation pipelines. So changing our direction a little bit into document understanding. So when it comes to document understanding, we have different models that we use, like classification and data extraction models. So when it comes to the initial training, it it is a bit of a complicated thing, or it takes time to train documents, unlike any other model. So we may also think that validation station in the document understanding workflow may help us do the initial training, because it's easy. You can do that while the process runs. So is it actually a good idea to use the validation station for the initial training of any document understanding model, especially the generic document understanding model that you can train and use for any kind of model? Well, it's not a good idea to use the validation station for the initial training. The reason is, if you compare the validation station, the data extracted from validation station, and the data given to you by the data manager, the data manager gives you much more information about the extracted information. And also, the data manager has the capability to look for the same value in multiple pages. Like, for example, if the invoice number is available in two different pages in the same document, you can label it in data manager, whereas it's not going to be possible in validation station. So considering that, mainly, it's always a good practice to use the data manager for the initial training rather than validation station. um, and the important thing is, to handle certain scenarios like that, the data manager has very special options that we can enable during the data labeling session or whenever you are defining the fields. So that will actually help to capture much more accurate information than the things that you provide through validation station. Anyway, the idea of using validation station is to fine tune your existing models, not to do the initial training. So that's why validation station is there, just to validate what's being extracted and correct if anything is wrong. So to answer the question, you have to always use the data manager for the initial training, not the validation station. So this is a very interesting question. So when we are processing documents, every time we process a document, we get a lot of validated information that we can make use to train our AI models that we have. But is it really necessary to use every document that we process, even though the model returns a higher confidence level to train the model? Let's have a look. Actually, to answer that, it's a very good question that I came across once. So you actually don't need to submit all the documents that you have for the training, especially when you are getting a very high confidence level on the fields that you are extracting or in classifying these models, the documents. Because if it's already giving a higher confidence level, you actually don't need to train it further. And on the other side, if there are any documents that you come across that has major failures in extracting certain fields, those are the things that you need to focus. So in our workflow, we can always use the confidence that's given to us through the extraction, and this confidence can be used to come up with certain logics where we can decide whether a specific document needs to get into the training cycle, or whether you can just ignore it from the training. Anyway, we are using this confidence to validate our information during the process, right after the extraction. So that same process can be extend a little bit to do this part as well. And the other important point is, when you have large amounts of data to train your model, at some point it's going to be very difficult to manage all these documents, because you will be processing hundreds and thousands of documents every day in these workflows. So at some point you are going to have to manage all the training data that you have. So once you grow the data set, it's going to be a bit difficult to manage. So what's being recommended is, um, let's take an example to explain. So for the initial training, if you take like 500 different documents, the ideal would be to have like twice that size or thrice that size. So basically, it's like, since the initial training is 500, you can keep up to like 1000 or 1500 documents as the data set to do the continuous training on your model. And whatever that comes in next, just we just need to focus on the parts that the model fails and add those manually into the training cycle, so that you can keep on improving the areas where it lacks in the confidence and extracting information. All right, so here we have another question. So this is a kind of a scenario based. So for example, let's say that we already have a model trained for invoice data extract, and over time, some requirements changed, and now you're getting some new kind of documents for a different language that your model is not already trained for. So in this case, how are you going to handle? Uh, so basically, how are you going to train the model? You need to look for different models to handle the new data that you see. Yeah, so for the answer for that is, you can use the same model, but the training has to be done in a different way. So to train the model that you already had, you did the initial training using the data manager. So when it comes to this new documents that you see, which the model is not already being trained, what you can do is use the data manager session that you have, import all these new documents that you get, and do the training, do the labeling there in data manager. The reason is, as I explained earlier, data manager captures a lot more information, and that's a place where you can do labeling for each and every field, even when the value is available on multiple pages. So it's a good place to do the initial training, even at somewhere in the middle when you get certain new document types or new languages to process. So always go for the data manager, do the labeling there manually, export the data, do the training, and then go for the fine tuning stuff through data manager, the validation station, as I explained earlier. So that's the way that you can handle it. So you don't need to have multiple ML modules to take care of different scenarios. You can just keep on training the existing model and use that along with data manager to improve your accuracy and also the process. So lastly, this is the one last question that we have for today. Should I maintain multiple data manager sessions or a single machine learning model? Yeah, so when it comes to document understanding, we always need to create a data labeling session where we do the labeling on data manager. But the question is, can we maintain multiple machine learning or the data manager sessions for a single model? It's actually not recommended. The reason is, when you have multiple data manager sessions, the documents you have in that, each and every session is going to be different. The sample size is different. Let's say you have one data manager session with 1000 documents and another one with 100 documents. So you can see the difference. And if you keep all these documents in one session, always whenever you do the labeling, you export a huge data set that it can train on. And the other thing is, in AI Center, you cannot have a single data set pointing to different data manager sessions. So it has to be two different data sets pointing to its own data manager session. So it's always a good idea to maintain a single data manager session for each machine learning model. But within the data manager session, you can have different batches, because as we have seen in other videos, whenever you are importing data, we need to give the batch name. So the same thing happens when it comes to automatic export through data manager, as we explained in the scheduling part of things. So each import will have its own unique batch name. So as I mentioned, use the same data manager session but different batch names to keep things organized so that you can easily refer to a particular set of documents. And always keep in mind to use a single session. So with that, we come to the end of our video because we covered all the questions. So I hope this video is helpful, because these are some of the questions that I came across while talking to different people in the community. And it seems to be that these are some common questions they have, so I thought of doing this video. So with that being said, I hope this is interesting, and I plan to connect with you guys again with another interesting video. Until then, take care, and I'll see you soon.